One morning, there was a man named David who worked for a money delivery company. David worked in an armored truck as a driver who delivered money to each ATM. He was with a coworker named Kelly. David felt bored in his monotonous job of delivering money and putting money into ATM machines. It was his sense of boredom that made David fantasize about being a reliable robber in every action. When David and Kelly rested in a place, Kelly asked about what if they robbed the money from the bank they were carrying. Hearing that, David firmly rejected Kelly's invitation. David said he didn't want to deal with the police or go to jail. But Kelly continued to incite him, even though David still refused her invitation. Then they both went to a place to practice shooting. Kelly got the first shot. She managed to shoot right on target. Meanwhile, David, who was full of ambition, could not shoot at all at the target. Nevertheless, David remained confident and put his gun in his pants. Unfortunately, David accidentally pressed the trigger so that David's pants were hollow. Shortly afterward, David received a call from his girlfriend named Candace. David was late for his engagement photo. He immediately said goodbye to Kelly and went to his girlfriend's house. When David arrived at his girlfriend's house, Candace looked sad because it turned out that she had dressed up 3 times. She did this because David was late for the photo shoot. David was engaged to a girl who behaved strangely. Even so, David didn't make a big deal out of it. After the shoot, Candace shared with the photographer that David was a distant cousin of her dead ex-boyfriend. The girl lightly said that she chose David because he was alive. Hearing that, the photographer just congratulated them on their relationship. Then David continued his work. He returned to the office and chose to cook in the kitchen. There, David met his friend, Kelly, who was sad. Kelly said that she broke up with her boyfriend. Hearing that, David looked happy because he also liked Kelly. Not long after, their supervisor came and told them to hurry up and deliver the money. Kelly, who was in a bad mood, felt that her supervisor was just telling them what to do. Kelly also made her supervisor upset with her. So, Kelly was fired on that day. Then her supervisor told Kelly to take off her uniform. With annoyance, Kelly took off her shirt and left only wearing a bra. David tried to stop Kelly. He asked for Kelly's phone number. David felt more and more in love with Kelly, who made David feel special. However, Kelly became a woman who hung out with bad people. She lived with Stephen Eugene, who was Kelly's old friend. Other than Stephen, there was also his wife named Michelle. In the early morning, Stephen, Michelle, and Kelly saw the news on TV about a bank employee who managed to steal $20 million and escaped to Mexico. Stephen suddenly wanted to rob money too. He remembered that Kelly used to work at a money transfer company. Stephen then looked at Kelly, who was sitting in the seat in front of him. Stephen firmly expressed his desire to rob the company where Kelly had worked. However, Kelly quickly refused Stephen's request. Then Stephen didn't want to give up. He tried to convince Kelly of his plan. Stephen said that they needed an insider to succeed in robbing the money. Kelly hesitantly agreed to work with Stephen. Kelly then remembered that David was still working there. She planned to ask David to meet. One day, Kelly invited David to meet at a cafe. Stephen and 2 of his male friends also came along, but they sat behind Kelly and tried not to have direct contact with David. After waiting for a while, David finally came and brought Kelly's favorite roses. David happily approached Kelly, who was sitting. Without further ado, Kelly directly conveyed her desire to rob the Loomis Fargo company or the place where David worked. Kelly also said that he had the plan with 3 people behind him, but Kelly needed an insider to rob the money. Stephen then introduced himself to David with the fake name that was Geppetto. David, who knew Kelly's stupid plan, instantly refused. David didn't want to deal with the police, but Kelly tried to convince David by holding David's hand. David then melted a little with Kelly's attitude. However, David still refused Kelly's offer. The next day, Kelly called Stephen. He was trying to persuade David to join in and plan a money robbery with Kelly and her friends. Kelly asked David whether he wanted to join the robbery plan or not. David initially refused on the grounds that he was afraid to rob his own workplace. Yet, in a spoiled tone, Kelly lured David and said that David could date Kelly after the robbery plan was successful. David, who heard that, slowly began to melt. Hearing that, David instantly forgot about Jandes, his fiancée. Then David, without thinking twice, decided to join the robbery plan. After that, David began to train himself by reading the FBI technical handbook, watching many action movies, and learning to use a gun properly. David spent his days practicing for the success of the robbery plan. Kelly also helped train David so that he could move money to the car quickly. A few days later, Stephen, Kelly, David started the action. Stephen prepared a fake identity for David to escape to Mexico. Kelly watched the back entrance of the Loomis Fargo company from a distance. Kelly then saw David and his friend named Robert coming out of the back entrance to end their working hours. David pretended to get into his car while waiting for his friend to leave. After he felt safe, David opened the back entrance of the company and entered the safe room. Without hesitation, David opened the safe, which contained cash. David then rushed to move the money into the car. With enthusiasm, David threw the money into the car, just like Kelly taught him when they practiced moving money. In the middle of moving the money, David happily contacted Kelly via walkie-talkie. David said that he had fantasized about being a robber for a long time, and now that fantasy was coming true. David's conversation was overheard by Stephen. Then Stephen firmly warned David to stay focused and continue his work. David was angry with Stephen. He then turned off his walkie-talkie and put it on the table. But soon after, Robert unexpectedly returned. The problem was that Stephen and Kelly couldn't contact David. They tried to tell him that Robert was back. However, David couldn't find out because his walkie-talkie was turned off. Moments later, Robert entered the room where David was. Robert heard something from that room. Then David was forced to face Robert. With a little nervousness, David said that he took overtime to increase his marriage capital. Robert firmly reprimanded David. He told David to say that he took overtime so that there would be no misunderstanding. Then Robert just left David. David was then afraid again. He planned to cancel the robbery plan. But suddenly, Kelly sang in a spoiled and melodious voice. David, who heard that, became increasingly fond of Kelly. This made David excited to empty the money safe. Soon, David managed to move all the money in the safe into the car quickly. Then David immediately broke the existing CCTV, and he also took CCTV footage in his office. However, David missed one CCTV near his car, which turned out to be a hidden CCTV. Then David tried to close the car door, which could not be closed due to the amount of money inside. Instead of taking the box that blocked the door, which was a box to move the money, David chose to tidy up the money and get into the car. As a result, the door accidentally closed and locked so that David could not get out of his car. David was initially confused about how to drive the car from the back of the car. Thankfully, David had an idea, which was to arrange a pile of money, and he tucked the money until it touched the gas pedal. After he felt the right touch on the gas pedal, David then took the car out brutally. When David got out, Stephen, his friend, and Kelly opened the car. They were amazed at the huge amount of money inside. Kelly then gave $20,000 to David, even though there was a lot of money in the car. Kelly then placed the $20,000 in David's underwear. She reasoned that this was a way to prevent David from being suspected by the police at the airport. Kelly also explained that Kelly would transfer the money to David after David arrived in Mexico. Hearing that David just followed Kelly's words, Kelly also provided a fake identity card and birth certificate, while the owner of the identity was actually Michael McKinney, who was a close friend of Stephen. After David disguised himself by wearing a wig, he went straight to the airport. He took a plane to Mexico. The next day, Kelly contacted David. She asked about David's condition, but it turned out that Stephen overheard their conversation. Then Stephen conveyed his evil plan to Kelly, which was that Stephen wanted to report David's location to the FBI. Once Stephen reported about David, the Mexican police secretly searched for David's whereabouts. They managed to find David, who stayed at a hotel. Luckily, David was able to escape from the pursuit of the Mexican police. Meanwhile, Stephen and his wife counted all the money that David managed to rob, which amounted to $17 million. This made Michelle want to shop for anything and spend. Stephen tried to stop his wife from going on a spree. As Michelle continued to provoke Steven, Steven ended up spending the money on a luxury car and an elite house on a hill. Meanwhile, in Mexico, David was still trying to escape from the police. He even disguised himself by wearing frizzy wig and clothes that were different from his style. David complained to Kelly because the money hadn't been transferred yet. David accidentally found a gym membership card in Steven's name when he opened his wallet. David finally understood that Steven was Geppetto's real name. Hearing this, Steven, who was afraid that his identity would be revealed, then invited one of his friends who worked as a hitman. Steven asked his friend named Mike to go to Mexico as soon as possible and look for David. Once he found him, Mike had to kill him so he wouldn't reveal Steven's identity. Long story short, Mike went to Mexico. Mike was a unique hitman because of the way he worked, which often made it difficult for himself. Mike then bought a gun. Instead of buying a great weapon, Mike instead bought an old weapon. Then he approached David to shoot him. Fortunately, the shots fired from the old gun didn't hit David but wounded Mike himself. Shortly after that, Mike told David to run as far as possible, and then Mike chased him. David was a little confused by the man, but he kept running until he managed to escape from Mike's pursuit. After he was safe, David called Kelly and said that there was a mysterious and strange man who tried to kill him. Kelly, who couldn't bear to know that David was in trouble, eventually confessed that the hitman was Steven's man to kill David. Hearing that, David was very disappointed with Kelly. He also concluded that all this time Kelly and Steven had been working together to take advantage of David. David was finally frustrated and sad because Kelly, the person he liked, had betrayed him. David then spent the night drunk and ate watermelon on the side of the road. While David was eating watermelon, Mike suddenly appeared from behind. Mike slowly approached David and hit him with a pan lid until David fainted. In the middle of the night, David woke up. He was surprised that he woke up but was in the bathroom. David then saw Mike was preparing to kill him. David quickly offered all his money so Mike wouldn't kill him. Hearing that, Mike immediately took David's wallet. He was surprised to see David's fake identity named Michael McKinney. Mike was even more shocked when he saw the date of birth on David's fake certificate, which read May 8, 1961. It turned out that the hitman's real name was Michael McKinney. He also said that he was born on May 8, 1961. David then remembered what Kelly had said about the fake identity belonging to Steven's friend, which meant it was Mike the hitman. Mike was still confused by David's fake identity. Finally, Mike thought that David was his long-separated twin brother. Mike then cried and apologized for about to kill David, until finally Mike decided to not kill David but rather spend time together. They went to the beach and had fun like siblings. After that, David contacted Steven and threatened to turn himself in to the police if Steven would not transfer $6 million in the next 2 days. 2 days passed, and David tried to check his bank account. However, it appeared that Steven had not sent the money that David wanted. Meanwhile, Kelly spent her day with a sense of guilt and pity for David. Kelly wanted to follow David to Mexico. She wanted to apologize directly to David. Unfortunately, Steven found out about Kelly's plan to go to Mexico to meet David. He then took Kelly hostage. Steven then contacted David and told David he would hurt Kelly if David handed himself over to the police. David heard that he was angry because he was confused by everything that happened to him. The next day, Steven held a party to inaugurate his new home. Steven had no idea that the FBI had suspected Steven and Michelle. The FBI found out that Steven's bank transactions were abnormal. On the other hand, it was David who managed to sneak into Steven's house. He disguised himself as a waiter. David then searched for Kelly's whereabouts. Finally, David also managed to free Kelly, who was being held by Steven. However, David deliberately disrupted Steven's party after he freed Kelly. David then blew up the gas cylinder and stole Steven's favorite car. David was about to run away, but David stupidly crashed the car into the very strong gate of Steven's house. As a result, the car was damaged and almost caught fire. Steven then approached David, who was still in the car. He then hit David near the catering car by the gate. David was surprised to find out that the catering car was filled with FBI members who were spying on Steven. David then had the idea to make Stephen emotional so that Stephen would confess about the robbery. That way the FBI members could record Stephen's confession. David then deliberately said that he was the mastermind of the robbery, but Stephen arrogantly admitted that he was the mastermind of the robbery. The FBI members who heard the confession were finally happy because they could get evidence that Stephen was the mastermind of the robbery. Then they took Stephen, David, and Kelly to prison. The FBI sent Stephen to prison for 11 years. Meanwhile, David received a sentence of 7 years in prison.